Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back to Progress America Unfiltered. We are here with another installment of our new segment, Cinema and Revolution, to talk about Little Shop of Horrors. So, when Linda suggested this as a movie for us to cover, my inner/past theater kid went wild. I don't think Linda could have known the amount that she would be unlocking in me in terms of memories, in terms of like musical obsessions. When she suggested that, she probably thought it was a very innocent thing. But then anybody in the proximity of the city of San Francisco has probably heard me singing this soundtrack for the past week as I walk around just like wreaking havoc on the city. But today we are here with, of course, Linda. We're here with Michael, and we're here with Brad in our second installment of Cinema and Revolution to talk about Little Shop of Horrors. So for those who are not familiar with the show or the movie, Linda is going to take it first and give us just a little background into it, and then we'll get into a discussion of how this relates to our political systems. Linda, what is going on with this great musical?
Yeah, so I'm really excited for this discussion because Little Shop of Horrors, it's been one of my favorite movies since I was probably about 11 or 12 years old. And I was always going to pick a musical when it was my turn. There was no doubt about that. But I did spend a little time thinking about which one. But then as soon as Little Shop popped into my head, I was like, yeah, it's got to be this one because of all the musicals that I've seen. I think it just has the most themes about class and capitalism and just the destruction that unchecked capitalism can wreak. So just a little bit of plot summary. Little Shop of Horrors. It's about a nerdy florist shop assistant named Seymour, and one day he finds a mysterious plant after a total eclipse of the sun, and there's like no customers in the shop. They're really poor. There's a lot of discourse about that at the beginning of the movie, how these are people who live in a poor neighborhood. They just feel completely overlooked and invisible to the upper classes, and it seems like they're going to have to close the shop. But then all of a sudden, the plant in the window just starts intriguing passersby. They come in, they want to spend lots of money, and everything is great until Seymour realizes that what the plant wants from him to keep surviving is his blood, and then eventually it starts talking to him and says, now I need bodies, like literal fresh blood from other people. And if you bring me those, I'm going to give you everything that you want, the girl of your dreams, a motorcycle, just any possession or status that you might want. It'll be yours, but you have to kill people and feed them to me. And so Seymour starts out with uh, basically this dentist. He's the boyfriend of the main female character, Audrey, and he is abusive, but she stays with him because he has money, basically, and she feels like she doesn't have any other choice. So just more about class and capitalism there. And so he ends up kind of killing himself accidentally. And so Seymour is like, okay, this is somewhat ethically justifiable, so feeds him to the plant, then ends up just it escalates from there, and Seymour really completely sells out his morals, but it turns out that it's also the humans around him and not just the plant who are very much encouraging it. There's this song called The Meek Shall Inherit where they're saying, you're going to be a winner now under capitalism. We're going to take this plant, we're going to sell it to every household, and if you just don't care about all the havoc that that's going to create over the country, the people who are going to die, you can have everything that you want. So forgive me for that long-winded summary, but as you all can probably tell, I really love this movie.
So, Linda, it's so funny that you mentioned The Meek Shall Inherit because that was, of course, my shining role when I was in this musical growing up. I was one of the like business people in that. I know you all didn't know you were in the presence of a celebrity. It's okay. It's really fine. But I think that was the only role that I got because like it was like a really non-singing role that I had, and they were like, by all means, do not sing. So don't be on the lookout for a record label coming from Progress America Unfiltered is the moral of that story. But within this discussion, Linda, you pointed out that this musical has a lot of underscores of the meanings of capitalism, of the meanings of like class struggle, these types of topics that we really like to cover a lot on Progress America Unfiltered. And so I want to pass it over to Brad now to give us kind of what his main takeaways were of the film. Brad, do you think that this is a film that like is intentionally about capitalism and the struggles of it? Or do you think this is something that is just kind of like an underlying theme of it that people can read into? Do you think that was the intent of the film?
Oh, very much so. I think it's quite obvious, especially with the sort of Greek chorus of the three women singing, that set things up at the very beginning with all the uh, down on their luck workers. It's very much a it probably would have gotten banned in the 50s. It's that level of kind of propaganda. It was my first time seeing it. I honestly more familiar with the old 1960s Roger Corman version, which was then adapted to an off Broadway show, and then became this version with lyrics and music by some of the greatest Disney writers of all time, the people that did Aladdin, the people that did Little Mermaid, and so the music was really shockingly good. I didn't really see that coming. I also saw a lot of where Seth MacFarlane gets all of his stuff for Family Guy. He's clearly a big fan of Little Shop of Horrors too. But yeah, it was. I wouldn't say it was heavy-handed, but it was definitely a very strong through line in the movie.
Yeah, I actually have a question about that, which is I must confess, as much as I'm a huge fan of the musical, I've never seen the 1960s original movie. Were the anti-capitalist themes as strong in that one, or did they add it
I
later?
don't remember that being the case. I think it's added in this one. This is Frank Oz. He directed this version. He played Yoda, as very famously. I think that's something that he brought to the project, but I could be totally wrong there. They were talking about redoing it back in the early 2010s, and I'm very glad they didn't, because it's the kind of movie that really does not need to be updated. It was Warner Brothers' most expensive movie ever at the time. I think it's a big budget show, and it did quite well. It's become kind of a cult following since then. Michael, it was also your first time seeing it too, right?
It was. Yeah, I'd never seen it. I remember seeing commercials for the early 90s cartoon spinoff, which was just Little Shop. They kept the horrors to themselves, and it was just like a guy and his talking plant that doesn't eat anybody. Uh, but yeah, the central metaphor totally went right over my head. And I was just watching it thinking, why? Why are we watching this? What does this have to do with anything? And I don't really like musicals generally. I usually like the parts in between the songs, but the parts where people are singing, I I don't care for. So yeah, I don't have a whole lot for this.
I will say that Ellen Green as Audrey like was such an impactful character for me as a young age. I just loved her energy. I loved her vibe so much growing up. And then I remember like watching because she still performs as Audrey in reproductions of this all these years later, and she's still absolutely phenomenal in that. And because we covered a Taylor Swift episode a few weeks ago, I'll also mention that I saw Jake Gyllenhaal with Ellen Green take on Little Shop of Horrors. Of course, Jake Gyllenhaal was like one of Taylor Swift's love interests that inspired the album Red, specifically the song All Too Well. So, I mean, all roads lead to Taylor Swift, I suppose.
And Ellen Green was kind of controversial at the time, in that she did the theater version of the show. Was not a big name film actor by any stretch of the imagination. I think they had tried for Cyndi Lauper and Barbara Streisand to potentially play that role as well, but they stuck with the right one, and she did a very good job. Part of there's another version of the movie that has a totally different 23-minute ending that is more akin to the play, where basically all the people that you like die and the plants take over the world, which was apparently very well filmed. It looked amazing. Audiences absolutely hated it, which I think speaks to how good the actors are. Both Rick Moranis and Green are in their roles. That as soon as they died, the audience was like checked out.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, like in light of our discussion about the movie and capitalism, to compare the endings because they still, like, whenever the show is staged, I saw it recently in New York, use the original one where the plants take over the world, but the movie has a relatively happy ending where Seymour and Audrey go live in the somewhere that's green, cookie cutter, suburban, perfect capitalist development that Audrey had been dreaming about. But then there is like a little plant seedling in their yard to imply that, hey, maybe, there's still something wrong there. But I wonder what you all think about what message does that send about capitalism compared to the original ending?
I think it rings false, but I don't think you can necessarily get away with just a totally unhappy ending in a bright, shiny Hollywood musical. You know, it had to be the happy ending with a little tinge of bleakness, sort of a counterpoint to Children of Men, which was like total bleakness with a hint of optimism at the end. Like you need to balance those two. The other one was just far too dark to work for mainstream cinema. But capitalism, honestly, it's truer to the essence of capitalism, I think, but wouldn't work for people looking to be entertained on a Saturday night.
That's a great point. I want to go back to that song that you mentioned, Linda, the Somewhere That's Green song. Um, just like I was listening to that song like in research of this episode, and just like hearing just like kind of the aspirations that were played out, like I think is very much in line with like what we are identifying as the American dream and like what we've been told is the American dream for so long, which is like she says like she wants a chain link fence, she wants like a 12-inch TV, which was huge back then. Like these little things that supposedly had so much meaning and just like had like the like recognition of being what family life was all about back in this time. And I think for me, something else that I really loved about this musical was that it had somewhat of like, probably because it was from a similar era in my mind as a 20 something year old, of being like from the Rocky Horror Picture Show era, like it is like that cult classic thing where it's like almost attributed to counterculture, like within the anti-capitalist kind of themes in this movie compared to like just like the gender identity discourse that is so prevalent in Rocky Horror Picture Show. Like it really does symbolize something as like counter to mainstream culture. And I think that's part of why it's so immortalized, like as a like pop classic, cult classic piece. Um, but like in that topic as well, do any of you have another like cult classic movie that is like so central to your like adult life? Like I feel like I got to know this because like I mean I saw Rocky Horror Picture Show for the first time when I was in 5th grade. My parents took me to see the late night showing of it, which they probably could have done without. But like, hey, I think I turned out relatively okay. But just like as my co-workers, co-conspirators, and all of this, are there any other cult classics that have seriously informed your work today?
I don't know if it's a cult classic, but the film Galaxy Quest, the science fiction comedy film from like 1998, maybe. I think it's one of the most perfect films ever made. It didn't really catch on well at the time, but has since gone on to become very much the Star Trek movie that never got made, and probably the best Star Trek movie of them all. And Tim Allen doing a good performance, like my God, just because he's playing himself as a giant asshole.
Absolutely. I haven't seen that one, but I definitely will put it on my list. I see that Alan Rickman is in that. So definitely Tim Allen, like very much names that are like, yeah, this sounds about right to me in terms of what I think of as a cult classic. What about Linda and Michael? Any cult classics that come to mind?
I don't know. I'm gonna stump for Walk Hard, um, which is like doesn't really like inform my worldview, but I do think of it almost every day. Like there's some different part. It's for anybody who doesn't know, it's Jake Kasdan's sort of. It's like a latter day Zucker Abram Zucker movie, where it spoofs the like Walk the Line, Ray, like spate of terrible musician biopics that were all nominated for Best Picture, um, but is just like real dumb, and the songs are really good and diegetic. So I don't end up having whatever my objection is to people bursting into songs that bothers me about with real musical. Um, John C. Riley is this very dumb quasi Johnny Cash, quasi Ray Allen, not Ray Allen, Ray Charles. Yeah, he's smell blind. His brother got cut in half, so I'm always just his dad just pops into his life at every moment, saying the wrong kid died. Um, I'm always when my two kids screw things up, I'm reaching for the wrong kid did X.
Awesome. And Linda?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, we're talking about my favorite cult classic right now. Like, Little
I love
Shop was
it.
just, one of the first ever like movies aimed at adults that I ever just really watched and loved. And I think it's just hit me, in different ways at different ages. Like, I think when I was in middle school, as a middle school kid, probably related to them as like outcasts singing about how they wanted to be somewhere better. And then when I got a little older, it was like, wait a minute, there's actually like a class element here. It's not just about anybody who feels like they want something better. But I think the songs and the acting are some of the best. And Rick Moranis, he just has such heart and presence that he brings to the role. And so I would also give a shout out to some of his other films from the 80s, like Spaceballs, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Just he was so good. And then he ended up taking a really long hiatus from acting because his wife died and he became a full time dad for many years. And so I just see him as someone he probably would have done a lot more movies, but his reason for going out is understandable. And I think he started to do a little bit more in recent years, so I'll be curious what we see coming.
Absolutely. And I want to pass it to Brad now, because I know you have some final thoughts on Little Shop of Horrors that you want to share before we wrap things up today. Brad, take it away.
Yeah, this movie was weird. It was really weird, and it was a very big budget movie at the time. Not like, it's not like a James Bond style budget, but it was a decently budgeted film. And it's the kind of movie that we don't really seem to get anymore. In the era of streaming, you need something that you can easily package. You can easily guarantee that it's going to make X amount of dollars. To take a risk on a movie like that in this era doesn't really happen anymore. You don't have as many people buying things on VHS or nowadays Blu-ray as you used to back in the day. So you didn't have that built-in backstop for if a movie actually failed in theaters. Now, if a movie fails in theaters, you just never hear about it again. Streamers aren't interested. It doesn't have a chance to become a cult classic. And that's one of the things that I find most disappointing about what Hollywood has become now. The sort of marvelization of it. You can make an indie film that you spend your own money on and maybe it finds its audience. You can spend 120 million on a big blockbuster, but there's that middle tier where interesting art used to be made. And I don't see it being made as much anymore.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great point. And I find myself thinking about cult classics and, what the future of cult classics are going to look like. Like, is there such thing as a cult classic that would be produced today? Or is it only something that's going to come out from these, 80s kind of era that I think I identify as a cult classic? Like, I think of Technicolor when I think of a cult classic, I think is how to describe that. But then one thing reigns true to me, which is the Barbie movie has yet to come out. That's going to be here in a few weeks. And I'm already putting that on my cult classic radar. But now we're going to pass it back to Linda for some more conversation on Little Shop and cult classics.
Yeah, so I just think Marvel and the other big budget franchises, they're the plant. They're eating all the cult classic movies and the budget for them. And the question is, are we going to have the musical ending or the movie ending where maybe somehow we can defeat the franchise-ness and get some budget back?
With these DC movies and the newer Marvel movies failing, hopefully that does mean that there's a market for it. And maybe we're souring on the big budget spectacle, the CGI dreck that we've sort of had forced on us over the past couple decades. Hopefully maybe that's waning. Maybe there's signs of hope there.
I mean, one of the things that I think is missing from this conversation about how cult classics don't happen in the same way anymore is that they are happening, just not in cinema. Like, if you look at the trajectories of some of the, what you think of as the biggest and most influential TV shows of the last couple of years, right? People finding Arrested Development on Netflix, people finding Breaking Bad on Netflix. There are these longer tail things that are happening, but it then becomes in service of this franchisation of the new things where suddenly Arrested Development is IP and we need to reboot it and do more things to wring more out of it. We need to get Sex in the City back. And I'm as grateful to Noche Diaz as anybody else, but is that really what we want HBO to be spending its money on?
Yeah, that is an awesome point. I think that, as we progress, we have to keep our eye out for some awesome cult classics because, future generations can't lose out on these. I say that as the youngest person on this call, but it reigns true for sure that there really is like so much that can be immortalized through film, so many common links, so many good messages that can be really just carried on through generations via film. And that's why it's such an amazing art form. But I think that wraps it up today for this conversation on Little Shop of Horrors and our second installment of Cinema and Revolution. I can't wait for future episodes of this because I will be petitioning for the Barbie movie to be covered, and I'm so excited to do that. But Linda, Brad, Michael, thank you so much for joining today. And viewers at home, thank you so much for watching this episode. We really appreciate it. Go ahead, watch Little Shop of Horrors, watch the stage musical, the movie, anything. Let us know your thoughts down below. Join the conversation with us. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you all next week on this channel or on our TikTok. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.